I have chosen for this month two lectures, and incidentally, even though you may have heard me lecture on those titles before, I can assure you I never give the same lecture twice. So it may be a similar title, but not the same subject. But it's sort of the two pillars, like the two pillars that hold up the Temple of Solomon. So there are two pillars, figuratively speaking, that hold up the Temple of the Gnosis. And they are the mythic figure of Sophia and the mythic figure of Christ. So we'll start with that of Sophia, and I intend, if I succeed, to handle that subject in a manner probably seldom handled before, certainly hardly ever handled by me, and it may give you an additional way of looking at the topic. First of all, we need to perhaps mention that in recent years, with the coming of the feminist era and so forth, so the figure of the Gnostic Sophia, the figure of the Gnostic Sophia has received probably more publicity than it had even in the 3rd century, which in itself is not necessarily a good thing or necessarily a bad thing. One fellow student of mine in the city of New York said once that we have to watch ourselves that we don't create a Miss Jehovah, whereby meaning that we are not in the process of creating a monotheistic goddess figure replacing the monotheistic Jehovah figure. Because it would be just as bad, if not worse. And so we have to divorce ourselves, as Jung would probably call it, from the God concepts of our culture when we look at this figure or the one next week, and really look at them in their uniqueness, which is really very great and which can be very important to us. So that's just by way of an introduction. The next issue, which will lead us right into the topic itself, I think has to do with the circumstance that people have a poor way of dealing with a myth. I always remember, and I probably mentioned this I mentioned here so many times before, that the great Joseph Campbell, truly one of the outstanding mythologists of the last century, used to tell this, that he went into a studio, probably for a radio program where he was being interviewed, and the snooty interviewer said, "Well, Mr. Campbell, how come you're so interested in myth? Everybody knows that a myth is a lie." And so Joseph Campbell said, "Well, I wondered how am I going to be able to dialogue with this guy, you know?" And I'm sure it was quite difficult. So obviously, let's say some of the good definitions. I think it was Professor Quispel, the great Gnostic scholar and Jung's Gnostic advisor, who said that a myth is always an attempt to tell a truth that cannot be told any other way. So one has to divorce oneself from the in this case, unhelpful factual orientation of our culture, and acquire, at least for the time being, a mythic orientation, which is not easy to acquire and is probably even more difficult to represent. Because if we truly try to represent a genuine myth, then it will very soon appear to us that we are dealing with a multiple topic, that the story is the same, but the way to understand the story, the interpretation of the myth, can be simultaneously of several kinds, and these several interpretations will not cancel each other out, but rather will supplement and complement each other, and will make the entire picture much more rich and much more important to us. And this is not so easy to do. And we have had, and some of you were here, we have had good examples of that when we were dealing with some of the Arthurian myths, where also, yes, there is one way of understanding it, and there is another way of understanding, and then yet another way of understanding, and all of these attempted interpretations are quite capable of existing and being instructive at the same time. So one has to kind of develop a little multiple perception for this. You may recall that we, for instance, attempted, I don't know how successfully, to interpret the figure of King Arthur as possibly as a remnant of a historical figure, and in addition to that, a figure very importantly interior to the individual, the hero with 1,000 faces, as Joseph Campbell called it, and in addition to that, several other interpretations. And when we put all of these together in some meaningful fashion, then we get a rich picture that will help us in our understanding. And so it is that task that I shall attempt tonight also, and it depends as to how well it will resonate with you or with some of you, but we'll do it just the same. Now, let's say, just to mention some of the interpretations which I will not deal with as extensively as I should. The Sophia figure, which incidentally appears in your canonical Bible, in the so-called wisdom literature, a whole bunch of different treatises, the book of the Wisdom of Solomon, Ecclesiastes, Ecclesiasticus, and a few others, is a mythic figure that played a great role, and perhaps under several names in different traditions, and that we may assume to have a, how should we put it, a quasi-objective existence in a non-physical manner, in a reality that is different from ours. You can call it an archetypal reality, you can call it the aeons of the Gnostics, you can call it any number of names, but it is, let's say, it is a reality with which ordinary humans like ourselves have interacted, have had insights into, have received communications from, and at times incorporated such figures from that reality in their scriptures. So let's say that is it is needful for us to presuppose and to use as an important foundation of our insight a reality that is different from the one within which we live. A reality that is neither physical, nor emotional, nor intellectual, nor even intuitive, and yet tremendously insight-producing and wonderful. So let's say the existence of such a transcendental reality, because I'll mention in a minute why I call it that, of such a transcendental reality has been the inspiration and the producer of insight of many, many important people. Probably one of the last ones in our history, maybe there are others rising right now, having been C.G. Jung, who indicated that a mythic reality is of very, very great importance and of very, very great power. And of course, from Jung we can jump just clear back into the ancient world of the ancient Greeks and Romans and Egyptians and so forth, and there we will find also that the mythic figures, let's say the central figures of the mysteries of Eleusis in this case, of the god mother Demeter, and her daughter, who's often referred to as Kore, the girl, and so forth, is of tremendous transformative importance. And yet they are obviously figures that do not represent, either in the present or in the past, a factual reality. But they represent a reality much more important than factual. They are a symbolic reality in the sense that their figure, the various events in their mythic life are capable of inspiring and perhaps even, if you want to use that much abused word, transform us in a very important fashion. The one little incident I always like to quote about that regarding the mysteries is the one from a wily lawyer and politician of Rome by the name of Marcus Tullius Cicero. And Cicero went on record saying that the Eleusine, everyone who went through the full rites, the greater rites of the Eleusinian mysteries, had always lost totally his fear of dying. Now, when something can do that, you are dealing with something very powerful, because the way in which we relate to this curious event, which awaits all of us, and which unfortunately impinges in various ways on our lives, is a very important thing. And let us say that if we can come to terms in a creative and transformative manner with that curious mystery, then we have done something extremely important. So these little insights need to be kept in mind. Now, we have spoken here in recent weeks about what might be called the Gnostic psychocosmology, which means that in the Gnostic understanding of reality, in addition to this strange, partially physical reality within which we live, because, you know, even though we have physical bodies and are sitting here in a nice physical building, kind of close to 100 years old, and all of that, where all kinds of interesting things have happened over the last decades, many of which fortunately I was present at, but, you know, there is a reality quite different from that. And unless we become, well, the psychological term would be conscious, to some extent and degree. None of us are completely conscious of anything, but we can be conscious in various degrees. If we become conscious to a marked degree of the reality, let's say, of this psychocosmology, then we have the means whereby to literally enter another world, another reality. And this is the part of reality that we are not able to perceive with our physical senses, and which is very little recognized as real by much of today's humanity, but which is nevertheless present and is of very, very great importance. And in our past discourses, we have at times mentioned that this psychocosmology indicates that irrespective of the physical or intellectual or emotional reality within which we function, there is an incredibly huge and influential other reality which does not appear to our senses, but which is of very great importance, and which also, by its very nature, has ways of moving over into our reality. It oozes over into our reality all the time. So it's never really absent. This is, you know, when we have been discussing some of Madame Blavatsky's secret doctrine in here with a little group of people, and it appeared to us obviously that here was somebody who had access to this other reality and who was trying to show people how they can be in that reality and this relative unreality at the same time. And that was really the essence of her mission. She says, you know, open your inner eye to this other reality, and I can show you something really amazing. That was sort of her mission. And it was an important mission, which really in its effects has endured to this particular time. So what is it that I'm talking about? That there is a vast world, can't express it otherwise, composed of beings, of energies, of forms, of spirits, of all kinds of mysterious things, which extends from our earthly habitat into the invisible worlds and ultimately to a supreme directing and emanating, I won't use the word creating, emanating reality of the other world. And that this is of extremely great importance. And indeed, I think the difficulties of our lives in this world, especially at the present time, but probably many other times also, are very closely connected with this. Because if this fabulous other reality is ignored and denied, then what we are left with is a pretty poor fare, if you mention it, very poor fare, and partial and truncated and mutilated. The reality within which we live is a mutilated reality. And that mutilation can be undone to a considerable extent if in various ways and at various times the contact with and the realization of that other reality is accomplished. It's not easy, by no means. Why? Because we have a predisposition, simply by way of being human, we have a predisposition to be attached to a reality which is at least to a considerable extent physical and which can be experienced emotionally, intellectually, intuitively, but in order to experience it beyond that, we need to develop an orientation and a training to travel literally in another world. Now, in this other world, there is a strange reality. And in a strange reality, there are strange forms of consciousness. There are strange beings. And some of them are easier to deal with than others, but all of them, if we are going to have some contact with them or some apprehension of what they are, have to be treated to a major extent. How? By way of our transcendent function, as Carl Gustav called it. Because we are not only physical, emotional, intellectual, and intuitive beings, but there is also another mysterious faculty in us, or we are in it, or whichever we want to look at it, which addresses itself to that which transcends all the others. And this is very important, because without exercising that transcendental function, we are literally crippled in our souls. We are soul cripples, because something extremely important, maybe the most important part, is missing. And when that is missing, then things are apt to be very partial and very fragmentary, and are not insight-producing and not important at all. Now, all right, since I got that far, so let's then keep in mind that this transcendent function, as C.G. Jung called it, or our ability to relate to the non-physical, non-intellectual, and so forth world, is actually a natural part of our being. We are not destined to be primarily physical people or even primarily intellectual people, because, for instance, both of those categories are very faulty. Why? If you ever have encountered people with those afflictions, then you will have seen that they are tremendously dull people. People who are only interested in the physical are terribly dull. And similarly, people who are interested only in the intellect, there's nothing more dull and boring than a solely and completely intellectual person. As someone who moved in the course of my life among intellectuals, I can attest to that in a very powerful fashion. You know, if you have wondered why so many university students nowadays turn out so weird, that they demonstrate for such weird causes and otherwise do amazing things, it's because they have been subjected to being bombarded by champion intellectuals called professors. So, you know, that's the way it is. But on the other hand, where we may say these nasty things about the professors, and I have known some very, very nice professors, and there was a time when I was a kind of a short-tier professor myself for a few years, you know. But the important thing is that Carl Jung put it well within that context. He said that really important experiences, and I am modifying his word, the really important insights, the really important knowledge must be in the psyche. In the psyche. And the deeper the recesses of the psyche are from whence it comes, the more important it is. And that means that in order to really know, in order to have gnosis of one kind or the other, we have to know how to relate ourselves to the deeper and deeper structures of our selfhood, whence cometh our help, to use a biblical phrase. And if we can do that, then we got a very important resource. But obviously there are influences in our lives, and there always have been influences of a more or less deleterious nature floating around of one kind or the other. But we have sort of a compound of influences at the present life, which is summed up often under the name of secularism. In other words, all that you cannot touch with the senses or even relate to insightfully with your intellect simply does not exist. And this becomes a cultural shibboleth, a cultural dogma. Now, the results of that can be very disastrous. And without sounding a kind of a trumpet of doom here, my name is not Raphael, or one of the other fellows with the big trumpets, but we need to keep that in mind, and the reason for it is that and this I believe in with every fiber of my being, and I believe in it not because of belief, I believe in it because of the experiences of a long and often arduous life. I can tell you that if you have no contact with the transcendent function, if you are not able to some extent and degree to take the steps and walk into that other world and experience it, then you are more impoverished than any poor person of the homeless streets of Los Angeles. You are that as an important saying in a Gnostic scripture says, then you are in poverty and you are poverty. And moreover, it's a poverty that no bunch of politicians in Washington, D.C. or elsewhere are going to hand you any quickly printed money for or anything like that, because they don't have the remedy for it. You have the remedy for it. You can undo your poverty. You can become spiritually rich if you set your mind to it. So, how? Well, you have to look for the ways, you have to look for the means. And one of the ingredients of this is to acquaint yourself with the great mythic figures that are within that strange spiritual structure which the Gnostics refer to as the world of the aeons. I am not telling you that here I am the great clairvoyant, who knows all of these things. I would say that my predilection in describing that other world is that it is a gigantic structure with many divisions, with many levels in it. And on each one of these levels there are forms of consciousness. And these forms of consciousness are the aeonial beings. They have sometimes been, at least some of them have been defined as angels. The pagan cultures called them gods in Egypt, in Greece, in other places. But they are a strange mixture of, what should I call it? A strange compound of energy and of consciousness. Now, and it's among these that we find such mythic figures of whom great and rich stories have been told, and whose figure has become an active archetype, again to use the Jungian terms, in our world, and among them is one that has been called certainly by the Gnostics and others, early people, has been called wisdom. Now this wisdom, which in Greek is Sophia, in Latin is sapientia. I'm not going to repeat it in Hungarian or Slovak or anything else. But let's say this is a very, very important figure of this other world, which, because of its nature and because of its callings, had, let's say, repeated manifestations and interactions with human consciousness. Here is probably a key to the mystery, and the mystery being how can these astonishing transcendental beings interact with us lowly humans, or even more importantly, how can we lowly humans interact with them? Well, that's a great mystery. That's there's the rub, as the Scotsman would say. And yet, it's not such a big rub that it cannot be comprehended, because in them and in us, in the totality of their being, in the totality of our being, there is a common element. There is something that we share. Madame Blavatsky and Annie Besant, or theosophists, frequently referred to as the life, but it's not a term I like very much, but it's the best that the dear people could do in the 19th century. And Annie Besant wrote a beautiful little poem, which I'll spare you with, called, which starts, "Oh, hidden life, vibrant in every atom." Now I'm almost reciting it. So you can call it that. It is the life of consciousness. It is the life of being, the life of insight and constant transformation, that kind of a life. And since these great mysterious figures in the aeons that the Gnostics spoke about and others partake of it, we also partake of it. This is what we have in common. And if we utilize that commonality, then we will know something with an unusual knowingness, which has been called gnosis in Greek. Now then, that being the case, let's say there has been a knowing on the part of some highly trained and devoted human beings with this figure. And that is the one we are speaking about now. But once again, I need to call attention to the fact that this figure and what she stands for is also inside of us. So that might scare you. You say, I have no Sophia inside of me. What the heck are you talking about? You know? But you do. And you also have a Christ inside of you. And it's pretty important. People like St. Paul the Apostle have called attention to it by saying, the Christ in you, your hope of glory. So this is this is really one of the most important data of existence. Not only as above, so below, but as there in the great reality, also here in this reality. And so I am going to, in part, try to relate myself now to the Sophianic figure somewhat in that fashion. There are various sources, and they are all good. In the Valentinus, the great Gnostic teacher, had his own story of Sophia, which was then recounted for us by his enemy Irenaeus, Bishop of Lyon, and while he couldn't stand Valentinus, he couldn't help but recount what Valentinus taught, and various others. And of course, then in that mysterious and weird period, the latter part of the 19th century, in this case quite late in the 19th century, all of a sudden, out of the seldom clear blue sky of London, out of the left behind the library of a Dr. Askew, a medical doctor, there came a large volume in Coptic, which is entitled Pistis Sophia, the faithful Sophia, faithful wisdom. But between all of these, we have quite a bit of material, and that is, of course, helpful. And so it's sort of out of a combination of these accounts, of these myths, that I draw my conclusions, and hopefully they are helpful. So what conclusion do we draw to begin with? You know, to deal with Sophia's conclusion, one needs to have glasses on. First of all, obviously, here is the archetypal mythic figure. I mentioned before, appears in the wisdom literature, appears in many places. And if we want to stretch the point a little bit, you might say that there are always predecessors of these archetypal figures that appear in history. Even as there are predecessors of Jesus Christ, even as there are predecessors of Buddha and so forth, there is always another of which the present one becomes a manifestation. And I am convinced, and that's just purely my own opinion, that the great Isis of Egypt was an earlier manifestation, an earlier formulation of Sophia. And one of the sentences that points in that direction is that the ancient Greeks This you can find it in Aristotle, you can find it in Plato, you can find it in much more common literature. The ancient Greeks said that all the goddesses, that is their goddesses, were actually neither more nor less than aspects of Isis. Because the reverence, the orientation toward the incredible, mysterious archetypal structure of ancient Egypt was very, very great among the Greeks. And that also needs to be, because, those were, the pre-Socratics, and Socrates himself, and then the others, and Plato, these are still generally recognized as pretty smart cookies, if that expression is not too irreverent to apply to them. And as such, they knew what they were talking about. Now then, that being the case, we need to keep in mind that the Sophianic figure, similarly, is a perennial, another word to use, a perennial archetype that appears in various myths, in various cultures, but that is always there. And yes, its principal keynote, probably, is the one described in her name, wisdom. But of course, its function, its abilities to deal with various things, its manifestations will differ with the culture that we may be thus speaking about. So let's say what we need to keep in mind that the Sophia myth, like other myths, is inclusive rather than exclusive. So it will include many meanings. And these meanings don't exclude each other, they don't weaken each other, but if anything, they support each other. So now then, so what is the story of Sophia? What is the Sophia myth? Actually, the two great sources, the recensions of Valentinus' statements and the summarization of a very, very vast myth in the book Pistis Sophia, obviously speak of the same figure. So, what is the Sophia myth? So I will use, hopefully not to your disappointment, I will use, I don't know, I didn't bring it with me, so I won't use it. It must be in the thing. Well, because I have, well, let's see, here's my book, the Jung and the Lost Gospels over there among them, because it also must be in the office, but I will find some of it here. Thank you so much. As I did with the previous series, I let's see, where are we? Sorry. Here we are. So, So here is a very early source that alludes to the same figure, which comes from the writings of Simon Magus, early Gnostic. In the beginning, the Father intended to bring forth the angels and the archangels. His thought leaped forth from him, his thought, and one came forth from him who knew her Father's intention. Thus she descended to the lower realms. She bore angels and powers who then created the world. But after she thus bore them, she was also held captive by them. So that is one of the earliest descriptions. Now then, all right, I have to supplement. I said that so I won't be able to retell what's in the book because somehow I was not supposed to bring the book to the speaker's platform. So there is I'll try to tell it now in my own words, which probably will be adequate. In both of the main versions of the myth, the one told by Valentinus and the one in the Pistis Sophia, we have a very similar beginning. And the beginning is that there is this celestial principle of wisdom, of feminine nature, because she gives, she's also called the mother of the angels. She gives life and consciousness to other beings, and she is suffering from something. Apparently, suffering even in the highest realms is the lot of created beings. What she's suffering from is that she is in love with the Father, with the ultimate reality, with the Lord of the Pleroma. And since she has been sent to another level of existence, another level of being, she's separated from her source. And this difficulty afflicts her greatly, and so she's suffering from being separated from the ultimate deific principle. Now, maybe that rings a little bit true. Maybe that's our problem. Maybe we are suffering the separation from our source, from our origin, from our celestial Father and Mother. And maybe so many of our problems are the result of that. You all remember the spiritual, sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Well, we are all motherless and fatherless children, because by coming into this different reality, we have lost our parents. We have lost our contact with the beings of ineffable greatness from whom we came and from their glorious world of light, and we are indeed orphans in a strange land. Now, that's a good beginning if you want to call a bad beginning a good beginning. But that is it. So now a restlessness, a search, a longing arises in the figure of Sophia, and she casts about as to how she might rejoin her original condition and the great supreme being from whom she has come. And in this search, she looks from her aeonial seat. She looks out over the aeons, and in so doing, she sees a light, and that light reminds her of the Father, the ultimate being. And so she says, I have to go after that light. And so she, as Pistis Sophia describes very graphically, she leaps forth from her from her aeonial seat into the void and goes looking after the light. And unfortunately, in this search, she experiences difficulties, she experiences a confusion. The light that she saw was not utterly authentic. She has not really seen the real light yet, and now she is moving from light to light in the aeons in order to discover the light where she originated. Now, once again, let's try to draw a little bit of a parallel between these phenomena and our own. We are misled and tormented a great deal, each one of us in our lives, by will-o'-the-wisps of reality, of doctrine, of people, of all sorts of things of that sort. We are drawn to lights which are not the authentic light. And that, of course, in turn, causes us a great deal of difficulty. Right now, we are drawn to political and economic lights which don't do us any good. They haven't before, they don't now, and it would seem that with the passage of history, the will-o'-the-wisps of life grow stronger, and their attraction grows more powerful, and they draw more people's consciousness to themselves, but they are not what our consciousness hoped that they would be. And so here is our difficult and often disastrous task. It is the same as that Sophia moves from one aeon to another. Each one has a light which is still short a little bit of the ultimate light. And she cries out to the light to help her and to take her to the true and to the authentic light. This goes on and on. In Pistis Sophia, we have these beautiful invocatory poems where she cries out to the light, she cries out to the light, but she is still not there. And so, again, what does this teach us? It teaches us that is really our task also. We have to discover the transcendental light, the ultimate light, the light that enlightens. It is the same light that came to Gautama Buddha under the fig tree near Benares. It is the light that has come to others. It is the light that descended upon Jesus at the time of his baptism with the dove in the air and so forth. It is there, but it is difficult to find. Now, once again, the ultimate problem in our culture is that we have actually forgotten that there is such a light. And the will-o'-the-wisps that come our way are economic, technological, political, and all kinds of other weird stuff that, as we come to discover, don't do us any good. Every age has its own false gods, and goddesses for that matter too. And therefore, something has to happen. Something has to happen that undoubtedly happens to Sophia, as described in Pistis Sophia and elsewhere. Her awareness of which lights are authentic, her attraction to the manifestations of the ultimate light in the various aeons grow. And this is gnosis as a process. And so we must seek the authenticity of enlightenment. How do you seek that? You call upon the seed of of authenticity within yourself. Because, as I mentioned before, it may sound a little bit weird, Sophia is inside of us. And she seeks for the light. She seeks for the light through our eyes. She tries to commune with the light and utters her wonderful praises of the light through our vocal cord and through our mouth. She reaches out for the light of transcendence and for enlightenment through our hands. And if we can pay attention to that, if we can do that ever more consciously, if we don't ignore it, then we are on the right track. If we do, then we are obviously on the wrong track. But as I said, the will-o'-the-wisps are there. Every age has its own. Imperial Rome had the ideal of Imperial Rome, which for a little while went okay, but let's say wasn't all it was cracked up to be. If you saw the television program I, Claudius, which I think was based on a great modern English poet, I can't think of his name at all. Oh yeah, Robert Graves. Then you see how a great idea, the imperial idea, which really came into the world with Caesar Augustus, how it degenerated into triviality. I always liked that scene in I, Claudius when Claudius's grandmother, who was the widow of Caesar Augustus, speaks to Claudius and says, "Grandson, I so much would like to become a goddess. Can you do something about it?" That's more or less what she said. And he said, "Oh yes, grandmother, we'll figure out a way." So they proclaimed grandmother a goddess. So that's what the imperial ideal had degenerated into. And so it is with all sorts of other lights that arise on the horizon. And if it hadn't been for the messengers of heaven, who came from time to time to at least help things get right to some extent, that would have happened. Many people think that it did happen, but I think it only partially happened to the Christian religion. We'll speak about that a little bit later on. And how was the world saved from falsity, from a false light in the Christian religion? By people like St. Francis of Assisi, who came and caused, just by himself, the little boy from Assisi, whose father was an Italian but whose mother was French from the Languedoc, he managed to turn around this huge, unwieldy organization called the Christian Church. There was no Protestant church yet at that time. And he managed to exert an influence that basically saved Christianity. And so did a number of other saints. Saint Teresa of Avila, the woman with the sword on horseback, whom every king of Europe listened to, and particularly her own king, Philip II, and others. So we have the major and the minor messengers of heaven who come and reinforce the insight, the good, the true memory of the true light. And when we are able to take advantage of that, and when we can perceive that these people have a contact with something, if we listen to them, and if better than listening, if we are able to let their internal holy flame flash forth and come to ours and nourish ours, then things are in good shape. But we also need to keep remembering, and that's maybe a little more difficult to deal with for a variety of psychological reasons, that the process of enlightenment, the prospect of gnosis, has its own difficulties. It has its own opposition. Now, I am not trying to teach some kind of a new demonology. You know, here is Sophia and then there is the devil. Gnostics never believed in a singular devil. The Gnostics did better. They believed in, and they knew, not just believed, in vast crowds of demons. So you be happy. The Gnostics will tell you that there are millions of demons. The Christians will only tell you there's one devil. Yeah. Yes, but the fact of the matter is that there is always, in some fashion or the other, something that comes along that opposes that light. And then, so as Sophia moves from one luminary to the other, one light to another, and as she utters what are curiously and rather inaccurately called her repentances in the Pistis Sophia, what she's doing is she's calling to something authentic. She is calling to the real light. She's calling to the ultimate light. And she will not be satisfied with anything less. Now, here is, I would say, one of the most important, one of the greatest lessons of the Sophia myth, because that is what we have to do. We have to seek that ultimate mystical authenticity. And you may say, well, thanks very much, that's something that's too much for me, I can't do that. So that's it, that's the last time I go to 2516 Old Beechwood Drive. Because, you know, we are talking about impossible tasks. And yet these tasks are not impossible. Because even though we may not recognize it, even though we may struggle with it, there is a center of authenticity inside of us. There is something within us that knows. So it's not even really to attain to gnosis, but to come to recognize the gnosis that is already there and that knocks on the door of our personality and says, listen to me, listen to me. I can tell you what the reality is. I can tell you how to make contact with the ultimate. I can tell you how to realize that you are a fragment of the pleroma, but you have to listen to me. You have to listen to me. That has been called the still small voice. And sometimes it's not so small. I assure you that it can be as loud as all heck get out, so that you cannot ignore it any longer. It's very important. But there is always also something else. There is also always the other. And again, this is not a matter of a demonology, but it's a matter of the way that the created world within which we live is constituted. There are forces here which oppose the search for the ultimate light. There are forces here that don't want you to have any gnosis. Now, once again, you know, I'm not trying to scare you, because this has been known for quite a long time, because really I have a book somewhere among my thousands of books that are piling up, which is called, I can't remember who wrote it, it is called The Old Enemy. And it is a book on the world mythology of evil. So if you really want to get scared, that's a book to read, The Old Enemy. But and there was always an opposing force there. When there was a movement toward the good, when there was a discovery, when Sophia got closer and closer to the real light, always something there, trying to alter the situation and to bring about a condition that would make the finding of that light, difficult. And so this is also something that we have to look out for. This is what alchemy was all about. Alchemy recognized the two principles. It didn't demonize any of them. Salt is no more demonic than sulfur, although sulfur reminds us of the devil, but that's another thing. In other words, there are forces within us which interact with each other and which can definitely slow down the process. And these forces also come to us from outside. We have a lot of inducement. We have a lot more inducements toward falsity than we have toward the truth. And that also needs to be remembered. But in any event, so that is where the wisdom. This is Sophia. This is the wisdom. The wisdom speaks to us and says, "Listen to me. Listen to me." Read some of the wisdom literature in the Bible. Wisdom was there from the beginning. She was on the right hand of the Father when the worlds were created. She was always there. And when we are able to refer to that wisdom, then we are able to move from the will-o'-the-wisps, from the false lights, toward the true light. Now then, that being the case, what are we to do? Because the myth of Sophia is great and wondrous. And once again, we need to remember that just a little personalistic application of it, which I was trying to put forth with. Again, I had all kinds of notes on it, but they're not here. So I have to get to the notes in my head, But let's say as we gain access to that wisdom, then that wisdom will teach us how to discern the true from the false, the misleading from the one that leads to the truth. And once again, we have, don't say that you can learn it from someone else. You can't learn it from me, you can't even learn it from our scriptures, but you can learn it from that mysterious and yet ever-present and all-powerful and glorious center of truth within yourself. You can. You have to brush various things apart. You have to refuse to be deceived by the external forces. And in every age, they masquerade as something else. In the 19th century, already 19th century, they masqueraded as science. Oh, that's all you need. You need Isaac Newton, and you need Darwin and his monkey, and that's all you need, because that's the truth. Madame Blavatsky, when she was in America, after all, that's where 1875, that's where she founded the Theosophical Society and so forth. She lived in an apartment at that particular time in New York, and when you came into the foyer, in the foyer was a kind of a big shelf or something, and on that shelf stood a stuffed monkey, big one, dressed up in human evening dress with a top hat and obviously a statue, and underneath it there was a brass plate saying, Charles Darwin. So, in other words, building upon the philosophical constructs of the Enlightenment, people like Voltaire and Rousseau and Diderot and D'Alembert and all, they all seem to have been French. The French are very smart people. But in any event, they, building on that, they developed a worldview that by scientific method and the scientific investigation, we will learn everything that we need to learn, and therefore we will have a great life. Well, of course that did not happen. And what happened then, however, that as you moved into the 19th century, around the 1840s or so, then along came another bunch of people whom I really regard in their effects as rather villainous. And that was not true, of course, of poor old Darwin. Darwin was a very well-intentioned, good fellow. But these people have developed, out of the various revolutions, the French Revolution, the so-called Commune. Do you know that in the 1860s, thereabouts after the Franco-Prussian War, when France was defeated for the first time really big, because she was only defeated in a minor way under Napoleon, but at that time there was a terrible, terrible revolution in France, the so-called Commune. You know that those guys, only a Frenchman can get that crazy. So if any of you are French, please beat me up afterwards, but be gentle, okay? But they wanted to tear down all the beautiful historical buildings in Paris. The Notre Dame Cathedral, the Tuileries and everything. Why? Because they were from the past. They were of a different era. And of what they were built by the aristocracy, as if that would make something beautiful ugly. Now, you know that the word communist comes from those people. Communist, somebody who followed the commune. But fortunately, they didn't have the fulfillment of their desires, because in came a Scotsman who had become a Frenchman, Marshal MacMahon, who came with his troops and who beat the communists and who built, because that was his vow, that if he manages to win this battle and get rid of these rascals, then he's going to have built one of the most beautiful churches in the world. And he had the Église du Sacré-Cœur on Montmartre, a nice neo-Byzantine structure which you have seen. I wish I could have turned into a little Sophia mouse to be there in your suitcase. A marvelous, wondrous place, and then at least stop that terrible development. But it did not stop the baleful materialistic doctrines of others, who then later on managed to take over the great empire of Russia and many other countries, and who in various transmogrified shape and various twists and turns are still with us. Communism, Marxism, the great curse of the modern era. Now you might say, oh, what about Hitler? Well, what about Hitler? I mean, he was a man who was both evil and stupid, which very seldom go together, Really evil people are usually smart. But he was both. Otherwise he wouldn't have ended the way he did. And let us say, keep in mind what was the official name from beginning to end of the political party that Adolf Hitler led. And that's where the nickname Nazi came from, because those are the first three letters. Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? So it is the first evil flower of the commune and of its other developments. So, that's fascism. Fascism was an Italian development caused by a little exceedingly ugly man, because my mother saw Mussolini very close when our uncle was a Hungarian ambassador in Rome, and she says Mussolini was the ugliest man whom she ever encountered. He was really, really ugly. In any event, it's a different thing. But even there, what was Mussolini? Mussolini was a socialist newspaper editor whose parents hated Austria, which is sort of one of my countries, and who named their son Benito after Benito Juarez, the Mexican president who had the Austrian Archduke, who became Emperor of Mexico, executed in Querétaro. So those were the kind of things that were running Europe at that time. A disgusting lot, murderous people. In any event, now what are we dealing with? We are dealing still with the reverberation of these ideologies. And how can we get away from them? We can if we respect wisdom. Because if you are able to take whatever difficult rags they may have tied to your eyes, you will see that these things are abovo, as we call it in Latin. That means from the egg, right from the very beginning. These things are evil because they deny the spirit, because they deny the existence of a deity, of as Jung called it, a superior power. And when you have a society that officially denies these things and persecutes those who deal with them, then you have something very, very bad. Whether it is done in a university or whether it is done in a political place or anything, it is extremely important. Why is it, well, I'm going to sort of try to conclude with that. Why is it so important to have a connection, even if it's just often, largely emotional and intellectual and things like that, to have a connection with the superior power? Why is it so important? Because it creates a foundation which will not go away. It's a foundation that no earthquake will shake, that no flood will wash away, that no fire will destroy. It is the foundation of your contact, even though perhaps only intellectual or emotional, with the ultimate reality. And that ultimate reality comes through. It trickles through the structures of the psyche, through the mind, and it finds its own relative inside of you. And there they are, the Christ within, the Sophia within you, and the one that will have just come to you, shaking hands and creating a much greater reality. So it is very important, ladies and gentlemen, it is extremely important and in our present culture unrecognized that early in life already, if at all possible, you should have an orientation toward the superior power, to the ultimate superior. You know, I am not making a plea for believing in a God with a great big beard. I myself only have a little one, you know, or anything of that sort, or a resurrected Old Testament God, for that matter. Because let's face it, old Jehovah wasn't a very pleasant guy, and. Of course, you can dress him up, you know, but let's say there are God images that are not very pleasant, you know. But it is extremely important that early in life, if at all possible, this contact, even it may just start out as an intellectual contact, emotional contact, which is devotion. Listen, devotion, you even say, oh, well, here are all these people, and they got that bloody Jesus on the cross. You know, that's not what's important. What is important that in turn relates in their psyche to something good, to something benign, to something kind, to something wonderful. And that when that wonderful thing comes, then the world has turned a little more wonderful as the result of that. So let's keep that in mind. The United States of America, as Manly Hall in his very, very fine book, The Secret Destiny of America, actually it's a combination couple, has pointed out, you know, there was a supernatural foundation, psychic foundation, at the foundation of the American Republic. These people were all godly people. Now you may not go for that God. Makes no difference. The important thing is that there is an acceptance of something that is superior, something that is great, something that is ultimate, and that you can relate to, and that relates to you. Because in a strange way, this ultimate, faraway Gnostic power that Sophia was so unhappy because she got away from him, you know what, it is here. It has not lost touch with anything, because this is the mystery of omnipresence, that ultimate reality is present in every being, alive or otherwise, in every plant, in every pebble on the ground. It is everywhere, and it keeps on calling out to you. Wisdom, wisdom, listen to us. We have something to tell you. And here is Lady Wisdom, and she will come and tell you also. Because there is another world, there is another reality, there is another life. And you better know it. Because if you don't know it, then you are not going to have a life worth living. It's extremely important. Now, and you know, there is no computer technology, there is no, what is it now, that there is what is called a false reality, or yeah, all right, you know, all of this, all of that. But in any event, there are all of the, you know, all of these things are there. They are no substitute for this, because this is different. It is subtle. It is powerful. You can't get rid of it. Naturem, just like nature, the Romans said, naturem expellas furca tamen usque recurret. See how I like to flaunt my Latin? After all, I had 8 years of it. I should be able to do that. But in any event, like nature, you can chase nature out with a pitchfork, said the Romans. But it's going to come right back. And that's the same way. You can chase out the real, the good, as it has been called, the enlightenment. You can chase it out and substitute all kinds of ultimately highly unsatisfactory substitutes for it. But the real will come back. He says, remember me, when you were a little boy walking in the garden, you remember me? Remember me when speaking not to myself, of course. Remember me when you heard the Slovak peasants in northern Hungary singing hymns to the Virgin Mary. I was there, and I am still here, because I am the manifestation of the ultimate in its aspect of wisdom. And so I think there is something important. There is something salvific, which means that brings salvation, still in our world. But it has to be recognized. It has to be cultivated. It has to be. It has to become a living, at least a living visitor in our souls. Isn't it nice to have the wisdom lady come to you when you are able, and she'll come and visit you, and she'll ask you how you are, and she'll tell you, all right, my son, be wise, I can show you how to be wise, and if you are wise, then everything will be all right. Because foolishness is the real evil. Evil is stupid in the long run. It can be extremely effective. I have seen it, you have seen it in various ways. But ultimately, only the truth that is discovered by wisdom must prevail. So why can't we turn to it now? And others have. Some of them many hundreds of years after the Gnostics. People like the poor shoemaker of Görlitz, Jacob Böhme, who wrote Sapientia, the wisdom. So maybe we can turn a little bit toward that. To heck with everything else. Let the armies fight with each other. You can't do anything about it anyway. Right. Those who could do something about it won't do anything about it. You can't do anything about it. Let them do what they do. But remember wisdom. There is a source here that can make you wise. A source here that will make you face life. And since it was just the other day, was All Souls Day, make you also face death. Because that is also the gift of wisdom. And when some of us stand at the threshold with somebody of that, keep remembering it, that there is a life and a light. It does not only doesn't it go away, but it shines more brightly. There are innumerable testimonials to that effect, not only from the saints, but all others. You know that, as my late teacher, Dr. Alvin Boyd Kuhn, God rest his soul, wrote, and he wrote a wonderful little book about it. The ancient Egyptian esoteric teaching was that this is death. We are dead now. We are in the sarcophagus that is called our body. But when we come out of it, then we are in life. So it's really a complete reversal. And I think You don't have to read Jakob Böhme or Alvin Boy Kuhn, but you will find testimonials, many testimonials to that effect. And if you have any experience of that other world, then it will come to you, depending on your predisposition. Some of us are visual, we always see things. You know? Others hear always things, the weirdest things, and so forth. But the thing is, it is true. It is true that there is a greater life, and that greater life, when the lesser life is put away, that greater life shall prevail. And it will take us to where we have come from, and that there will be a great homecoming. And the great golden doors of the Father will open, and we will be taken in. And we will be told, yes, didn't I tell you that in my Father's house there are many mansions, there will be a place for you. And here it is. And then everything else will take care of itself. It's not a matter of belief. It's a matter of feeling, it's a matter of sensing this incredible reality that surrounds us right now, that without which we couldn't even take a breath. And it is wisdom. It is wisdom. Now, I would be remiss if for a couple of minutes I would not link this up with the manifestation of Sophia in the Christian religion, the Virgin Mary. If it were not for this mysterious figure that, again, mythologically, is attributed to the mother of Jesus, if that were not there, Christendom would have fallen into the abyss long ago. The saving grace of the Christian religion is the Virgin Mary. Is she really the mother of Jesus? Who cares? That's not what's important. She's somebody. She looks out for you. She's the mother who never left you, who has always been looking out for us, and who will continue to do so. And when the times are great, and when we are sick, and when we are taken to the other side, she will be there guiding us. I was born in a country that prides itself and has prided itself for centuries that it was that the Virgin Mary was its patroness, Patrona Hungariae. I remember the hymns to the Blessed Virgin, 100,000s of people in the streets of Budapest, while the red devils were looking down at them from their windows. But where are they now? They went back to where they belong, as their relatives. In this country and others, we also go. And the Virgin Mary and these things will continue. Why? Because they are real. They are of the essence of reality. They are real from every portion of their being. And their reality will become our reality. And they will help us, and they will save us from the enemy, and they will restore such goodness and insight and wisdom as we are losing day by day. They will restore it to us, and then we will be the children of wisdom also. That is what is important. Everything else is inconsequential and immaterial, and whatever else the detective on television used to call it, Perry Mason. All the rest of it is unimportant. That is what is important. Wisdom is important. And the great mysterious beings from the great mysterious reality who are never far from us and who will bring us of their wisdom and whose wonder and whose glory and whose help we should acknowledge and follow, because never in the history of this incredibly long world, never was there a time when these wisdom figures, these Sophias, were not there and were not helping us. And therefore they are there now, they will be there in the future, and praise and glory to them and to those who have set them in heaven. Thank you very much. Well, you're a little bit of the preacher, he comes out, you know.